Good morning, everyone, and thanks ever so much for inviting me to open your conference. It looks like a fantastic 3 days ahead that you've got with some really great speakers. It is the National Day of Reflection today, so I just wanted to start really by thinking about loss and everyone that has lost loved ones during this year, and everyone who has also lost moments with people that they cherish. And I thought, because I was opening the conference, I might reflect on a personal level on some of the challenges over the last year, and then look ahead to hopefully better times, and thinking about how we can work together to make those better times happen. And as I'm talking, I'm going to quote from older people at various points, and these are older people that I've chatted to over the last year, mainly on Zoom, sometimes on the telephone, and they have been an immense source of inspiration and wisdom to me and my team throughout this last year. So to start by looking back at this extraordinary year, I think probably for all of us with an interest in older people or working with older people, it's probably been one of the most distressing and challenging times we've ever faced. And yet at the same time, I think we've seen some of the best of who we are as a society. But for me, one of the things that came across so strongly was how some of the issues that we knew were there became visible in a way we probably never imagined or expected. And I'm going to start with ageism. We've known that ageism is part of our society, that age discrimination exists. But over the last year, it was laid bare. We saw the example of DNA CPR, where some blanket approaches to older people, and indeed to some other groups, where people weren't really consulted about having DNA CPR registered. We've seen some pretty dreadful language to describe some of what's happened, especially early on in the pandemic, when the focus was so much about vulnerability and equating older people only with vulnerability. And I think deep-rooted ageism and age discrimination has influenced the actions of governments across the UK and indeed across the world, and also influenced decisions not to take action. So I'll come back in a bit later to what we can do about this and how we can challenge ageism and age discrimination, and indeed the opportunity that some of these very distressing times are now giving us to make a difference. We've known for many years, haven't we, that social care is quite fragile, that the people who work in social care are some of the most important people in our society, and yet their terms and conditions don't equate to that. Everything that happened in care homes showed the importance, first of all, of care homes being part of our communities and of people understanding care homes. I've lost count of the number of discussions and meetings I've had over the last year with people potentially making decisions about what should happen, where I felt there wasn't really that depth of understanding of what care homes are about. We've seen also the critical importance of our social care workforce, and I hope that this last year will result in better recognition into the future. And for me as Commissioner and for the work of my team, a lot of our focus has been on how we protect and promote older people's rights during this last year. Sorry about the the cut-in just there. And I wonder whether we thought older people's rights were actually hardwired into our systems and processes and governments. And maybe what we've discovered this year is that they are not. And that's what we need to work on to change. And we've also seen a particularly important area of digital rights. We've seen, haven't we, how important it's been to be online, to be able to do things digitally. And yet 41% of people over the age of 75 are not online. And while digital access can be a great way of reducing inequalities, we've also seen that digital exclusion is a major factor in inequality, and we have to change that. Fundamentally, I think we've seen the importance of older people's voices. And I'd like at this point to commend CADR, and in fact all the research community, for all you are doing to capture and record in real time older people's experiences, their views, their thoughts, their ideas, because capturing their voices right now is incredibly important. And we've also seen how important wider evidence and data is. How many times have we heard politicians talking about being led by the data? And I think we've also seen that decisions about the data that is collected and not collected, how it's presented or not presented, are essentially political decisions. And I'll just remind you, for example, that early on in the pandemic, older people who were living in care homes and dying from COVID were literally not even counted. Talking with older people over the last year, some of the things that they've explained and shared with me is about how they felt that independence was taken away in a heartbeat. People talked about feeling that they didn't have much time left and it was being wasted. People talked to me about fear and anxiety about what was happening and what would happen to them. But we've also seen some fantastic community action, fantastic initiatives and ways of keeping engaged. And older people, I think, have shown enormous resilience and initiative. And at a time where we've experienced great loss and heartache, we've also seen people work out how to stay in touch with people in different ways, that even though we can't be physically close to people, we've worked out how to stay close in other ways. And at a time where I think so many older people have been categorized as vulnerable, surely what we've seen is actually we are all vulnerable, but we all have value and we all have contributions to make. And so much of our community action is utterly dependent on older people. So I remember a conversation quite early on in the pandemic from someone who ran a food bank. And she said one of the first things that happened in lockdown was that she lost most of her volunteers because most of her volunteers were over 70. So we mustn't let the framing of this pandemic and what happened be set out in a way that suggests older people have been vulnerable only. Older people have continued to contribute in so many different ways, and we must make sure that our recovery from this pandemic enables them to continue to do so. So as Commissioner over the last year, I've spent quite a bit of time engaging with older people and listening, but a lot of my time scrutinising, acting, challenging, seeking change, and doing all I can to give voice to people who maybe felt their voices haven't been heard. And it has been immensely difficult at times. And there's been a quote that stayed with me through the last year, which I'd like to share with you, and it's this: no social change ever happened on the basis of speak truth, but only if it's popular. And I think those of us who work with older people and are part of the gerontology community need to continue to speak truth, maybe particularly if it's not popular. So we're at an important moment as we look back, and how we remember and what we will remember will shape what we do next. And I think your role in the research community is vital in this, that we make sure that the history of the last year includes older people's stories, their stories as carers, as volunteers, as people who are working, as families and friends. Because the framing of what's happened over the last year, culturally and politically, will shape how we, and indeed future generations, remember what happened. And shaping what we remember also shapes what happens next and what we do. And we need to make sure that there's a true picture of what's happened for older people over the last year. And your role is vital in that. So looking ahead, we need to ensure that we leave no one behind. And in the work that me and my team have done, and I'd like to pay tribute to the fantastic work and support from my team over the last year, we produced a report called Leave No One Behind, which set out older people's experiences and also what we felt were the actions that are needed right now and into the future to make sure that older people are not left behind as we move through the next phase of this pandemic. And we've also set out measures for the next Welsh Government to take in our manifesto, and you can access both of those from our website. So the good news is we've already secured some important commitments. So we have a cross-party pledge to work with me to stop the abuse of older people. So the key political parties in Wales have pledged that post-election, whether they're in government or opposition, they will work in a cross-party way to tackle the abuse of older people. And the Welsh Government has committed to an action plan to stop the abuse on older people to be published, if it's in government, by the end of this calendar year. And over the last year, I've worked with over 30 organisations to raise awareness of abuse and to tackle it and to improve services and support. And that work will continue over the next year. And I'm incredibly grateful to all those organisations who have worked so hard and so positively to make a difference in this area. We have now from Welsh Government a white paper on social care, and in there a commitment to one of the things that I've been pressing for, which is a chief social care officer. In the same way that we have a chief medical officer and a chief nursing officer, someone who is at the head of their profession, who provides advice to ministers and who provides expertise, I think we need a chief social care officer at the heart of government. And I'm pleased that Welsh Government have committed to that now. And we need also, as I mentioned earlier, to make sure that the terms and conditions for social care staff are improved and that all the learning and all the distress and loss that has happened in our care homes results in support for care homes into the future. And all of our work must be on the basis of generations working together. So I'm pleased that we've been able to support the establishment of a cross-party group on intergenerational solidarity. And I've called for an age-friendly recovery to make sure that everyone can contribute to it and that no one is excluded. And we're now working with a number of local authorities to help them become members of the World Health Organization network of age-friendly communities. A really important step forward, I think. And if we follow those 8 domains of age-friendly communities, including things like housing and transport, but also civic participation, we will find a route out of this pandemic that enables people to live well in their communities. And it's time also for us to work at an international level on 2 key issues. First of all, on rights. For many years now, there's been work done to push for a UN Convention on Older People's Rights. And I'm fully in support of this because we have seen older people's rights across the world ignored or breached or forgotten about. And we need that strength of the UN now, as well as, I believe, a Bill of Rights, a new law on older people's rights here in Wales. And just last week, we had the launch of the global campaign on ageism. And this is possibly one of the most important things that's been happening over the last few months globally on older people's issues, is to come together, to understand what works in defeating ageism and to work together to do that. So in the last minute or two, I just want to touch on 2 other issues. One is a significant piece of work I think we all need to do, working across different agencies and organisations to enable older people to regain or rebuild their physical and mental health. And mental health is going to be a key area for all of us, actually. And it's an area that we will be working on in the Commissioner's team to see how we can enable older people to access the support that they need, and also in a way that is enabling and enables them to make their own contributions. And the second area is just that we all need to take some time as well to process and deal with what we've all been through in our personal and professional lives over the last year. In one of the engagement sessions I had recently, a gentleman called Ron set out an analogy about how we come through this pandemic that I want to share with you. And I asked his permission to do so. And he said that we should consider all of us as deep sea divers. And as we emerge out of lockdowns and out of the pandemic, we need to come up for air gradually. We need to take time to decompress. And I think those are very wise words, because in all the frenetic activity that we need to do, in all the work that we feel we must do to make sure we have an age-friendly recovery, we also need to be kind to one another, to be considerate of what we've all been through, and also to give ourselves personally time to process that. One of the most powerful performances I saw over the last year was the Secret Garden performance. Older people talking about their experiences of lockdown, what they've been through and what they hope for. And they set out 3 areas that they felt we all needed to hang on to. And they were love, strength, and hope. And I think that's a pretty good series of principles, really, for how we move forward together. And they talked about making sure there's a future for everyone. And that's what I think we all need to be able to do, and to find our way to contribute to that over the months and years ahead. And I'm sure this conference will make an enormous difference in giving people ideas, enthusiasm, commitment, and shared learning. So it's been a complete privilege for me to be able to open this conference and to share with you some of my reflections on the past year and some of my hope for the future. So Diolch yn fawr, thank you very much, and please do enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.